Hello, and welcome to the Florida Nurse Practitioner, ranked as one of the best medical podcasts in Florida. This is the official podcast of the Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners, the premier APRN advocacy organization in Florida for all nurse practitioners. If you are not a member, you should be. Join today. Just go to flanp.org and click on the red box, Become a Member Today. Members get all kinds of perks, including discounted CEUs, including autonomous practice recertification CEUs, insurance discounts, free monthly CEUs, and plenty more. So join today and make your voice heard. Help us help you. We are here to support all APRNs in Florida to practice to our fullest ability of our education and elevate the APRN profession in Florida. I'm Paul Bond, APRN, your host for this show, and I want to thank you for listening to the show and helping make it one of the 10 best-ranked medical podcasts in Florida. And on today's show, I thought we'd do something a little bit different, being that the state was inundated with two separate hurricanes relatively close to each other. We decided that we're going to do basically a post-hurricane debriefing, if you will, a discussion between myself, the president of the association, Lon Rattner, and one of the district representatives and the current treasurer, Vernon Langford. The three of us had a wide-ranging discussion on the hurricane response, some potential problems that we found, and hopefully some remedies to those problems moving forward. Because as you know, if you've lived in Florida for any amount of time, it's not a matter of if you're going to be affected by a hurricane, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So we discussed that and a bunch of other topics concerning hurricane response, and I'll leave it at that. So let's have a listen to our discussion. All right, and I'm here today with both the president of the FLANP, Lon Rattner, and one of our regional directors, who also happens to be our treasurer at the moment, Vernon Langford. And we're here today to discuss post-hurricane information since the state got hit by two hurricanes, pretty much back-to-back within about 10 days of each other. So, gentlemen, first, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Oh, sure thing. No problem.
All right. And since the state was hit in two different ways, one through the Big Bend and then one across the entire center of the state, that was pretty much an unprecedented kind of thing. I mean, even with the year that we had 4 hurricanes come through, they were mostly glancing blows except for Charlie. So this is the first time really, in as long as I can remember living in Florida, I've been down here 40 years, that we've had this much hurricane damage across this much of the state since maybe Andrew. Is that about right? Or was this worse than Andrew, would you say?
My opinion was that this wasn't as bad as, this was just more of a experience of a direct hit coming through the state in a worst case scenario. A lot of high populations were hit, and then a big population like Tampa and Fort Myers area were hit as it went up, and then it went through a lot of dead space. Helene went through the Panhandle, hitting, I'm going to say, lesser populated, but going through higher population, which Andrea was more out Everglades, where the bands and the northern bands really ripped apart populations. Death tolls were completely different. But that's my experience after going through those, both Andrew and this.
Right. And obviously, every time that we have a natural disaster, the aftermath and the after action briefings and all that, we as a state, we as organizations, we as responders, learn from that experience. And I noticed myself from being in the fire service back decades ago, the two separate times that we had major conflagrations in the state. The first one was a for lack of a better term, a cluster. We had never experienced anything like that. It was Black Friday, where 2/3 of the state was on fire at the same time. And the second time around, it was a much better coordinated effort. Obviously, there's still always going to be problems. And with hurricanes, I've been in as a responder probably 11 or 12, and it seemed like, for the most part, things have gotten better each time. This time, there again, a lot of problems were brought up. A lot of areas of lacking of coordination came up. Lon, I know you actually responded both up to Helene, up in the Carolinas and Georgia, and then back down into Florida, and then for Milton. So did you want to talk for a couple minutes about what you saw as what the areas that were lacking this time?
Well, hey, Greg, Paul, you and I went through Floyd together in '99. Remember?
Yeah, we've been through a bunch. This specifically,
there was a call. It was an active duty call up. Who can go? Who can do what? And yeah, we ended up initially going to Tyndall Air Force Base. I got attached to what was the 30th Brigade and a detachment as a medical unit. And we had mainly. I had with me about 90 NPs, etc., and then medical teams to detach with those 90 people. Long story short, we initially went to Tyndall to recover for the storm. And initially, we were flying down the bend, got down to that Stanahatchee is where pretty much we started posting and then dropping areas of where rural areas were at, all along the beach areas. People that were just, we could see already, this was not a highly populated area. Let's drop, we would coordinate and drop. When I say drop, we would place a battalion aid type station, and then communications with amateur radio. From there, we went up to, knowing the storm had gone north, we went all the way up to the submarine base up in Kings Bay, and we stationed there when there was a talk about another storm. We were
right. But what kind of problems did you see, shortcomings this time as compared to other responses?
No communication. Well, at the EOC or at Tallahassee, I'll call it, at Maine, there was not a communication between knowing. Well, from the militaristic side, the military knew what we had, but the state didn't seem to know if they had any additional resources, i.e., do we have providers? Do we have people to go? I think that's where you're going with it. There was a lot of no resources, so they had to use the military. And I had made a comment, we have this whole list of people, and then I went ahead and spoke to my troops and asked how many of you, of the nurse practitioners, how many of you are familiar with like us or other organizations within the state? And many of them were not. And then I went to the governor. I said, do you have any contact, anything with the local EOCs? Well, yeah, we do. And the local EOCs didn't have resources, and it just kind of fell apart from that point on. We were talking to DMAT, who didn't really activate. We were talking to Rubicon, which is mainly those are the debris and combat engineers type thing, and finding that nobody was talking to anybody. No one knew what resources were really there. Kind of got me a bit overmotivated, and I had to be, but I was doing military.
Right. So what, if I understand correctly, you're saying from a civilian volunteer response capability, that resource or potential resource wasn't tapped.
Correct. I mean, I was very focused on the militaristic, anticipating, hey, I'm going to have civilian resources to work with. When I got these whole large groups of military, which was fine.
Right.
We came in.
Right. Okay. And Vernon, you've been involved at the state level in many ways, kind of tangentially with the Board of Nursing and the Department of Health in certain ways. What resources or what options do they have for mobilizing these resources, or even having a list of those resources? Do you know of any?
Not really. The Board of Nursing doesn't work really in that regard. And I think that it's not within their wheelhouse. It's not within their scope. So when these things occur, you'll have the Department of Health release messages to discuss things like a state of emergency has been issued. If you need to get your medications refilled early, that has been authorized. But I do think that there still needs to be better communication about resources available for patients who, or just the general public who may need shelters, who may need, in case their electricity fails, where's the closest place to go to? Because there are a lot of people who still either use oxygen or utilize other machines to help make their lives a bit more comfortable. If their power goes out, they can't really get anywhere because many of them are homebound. And
Right.
unfortunately, I don't think we do a really great job across the state, although we have good time to anticipate these things. We don't get the message out there as well as we should. And I think that puts a lot of people at risk. We hear a lot about people in mobile home parks who may not be able to evacuate either for financial reasons or physical reasons. And unfortunately, that tends to be where a lot of our death toll occurs.
Mhm.
So I think we definitely need to reevaluate our communications, and maybe we need to factor in, if we're doing a little bit better, potential, rides to get people and take them to shelters. Because if you're homebound, and it's nice that there's a shelter a few miles away, but you have no way to get there and you don't have anybody who could potentially take you. So I think there's an opportunity for improvement here. And I would like to think that we're learning as we go along and seeing where our voids are and trying to plug those. So hopefully for the next hurricane, because there will be another one, we are better prepared. That's the goal, at least I would hope.
Right, right. And that brings me to another point, too. You said because there will be another one. There's always another one. There's always going to be another one. I've lived in Florida for 40 years and been through 15, I think, different hurricanes that have come close or gone through, at least skirted the area that I live in. So you're looking at one every 2 years, tops. So it's always going to be there. And as you said, we know when they're coming. June 1st to November 30th is hurricane season. Every year, it's the same thing. One thing I thought of that I always do, but again, I have an emergency services background, so I was prepared always from a younger age. But by June 1, I have 6 containers that I can put water into. I have 5 days of food in the house. I have a generator, and I have fuel ready for it by June 1st. I have an evacuation bag in case I do have to jump out or bug out. So I'm ready to go for June 1st. Most people don't tend to be that way. And I don't know if there's a way that we can educate people that you got to take this stuff seriously, whether it's going to happen to you or not this year. You've got a good chance it's going to happen at some point. The longer you're here, the better the chance is that you're going to be affected by the hurricane.
Correct.
So
I don't know if you want. I don't know if we was also talk at that point. But yes, you're right. And preparedness is always a conversation. I have, with my background, I'm not going to get into that. But it's the forethought. It's the critical thinking of I'll say the
pre-planning for the logistics for the incident.
And all this was already done, but you look at the military, how they've done it forever. It is what it is. But we had this already in Florida. Why wasn't it utilized? Why wasn't it implemented? What happened?
Well, and there's where my question comes in, or one of my questions come in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we relicense every 2 years, there's a little checkbox that asks if we would be willing to respond for natural disasters. Is that correct? Am I not remembering that correctly?
It's that little box. Vernon, are we correct? That's that little box that's on there.
Yep.
It says
it is there. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand where it goes or if it goes anywhere at all.
Well, this is interesting because after the three of us started discussing doing this podcast, I started looking at where to sign up and what to do, or where to volunteer, where to help. Just as you, Lon, mentioned, the state didn't have the resources or didn't have them readily available. I found no place in an hour of searching, and you both know I know how to search the internet very well, where to sign up to volunteer, even to join DMAT. There was not an easy way to do it. There are 6 DMATs for the state of Florida regionally.
I think 409.
I think there's more than that. I know of at least 6. There is one that has a website that you can actually sign up through. The rest of them don't even have an active website. So right there's a problem, because we all are heavily dependent on the internet for information and doing things. I tried to look at signing up at the state level through Department of Health. There's nothing on their website about it. Obviously, the Board of Nursing, Vernon, as you mentioned, that's not within their wheelhouse, but I figured, well, I'm searching, I'll look. They have no link about anything for it either. I looked at the local EOC links off of Department of Emergency Management. Emergency Management, by the way, doesn't have a way to sign up. And the local EOCs don't have a way to sign up or to let it be known that you want to help. At least not the ones around us. I live in Flagler County, so I looked at Flagler, I looked at Volusia, I looked at Orange, and I looked at St. John's. So the 4 EOCs relatively close to me, and I could have not punt them other places. But out of the 4 that I looked at, 0 of 4 had a way to sign up. The best one for information about emergency situations and evacuations was Flagler. So what I saw was Flagler is ahead of the game in getting information out, but not coordinating any possible resources. And that seems to be a problem, especially if we are saying that we are willing to volunteer by checking that box. Where's that information going? Who's collecting it? What are they supposed to do with it?
And that's what I simply asked a simple question. Don't we sign up at this is at the state level when we get ready to leave? And it was my understanding that it sits nowhere. It just the list that you check that box is just there. And that became a bit frustrating. And I said that to Scott, and I said that to Governor Scott and Senator Scott, and DeSantis, and I said, this is fun. And he goes, well, we'll talk to that one. Let's go talk to the National Guard General, which we did. And we all had a few minutes to talk with people when we could, because they all were at their at. And I made my comments about things that are available, or that why aren't we using those resources? And everybody kind of looked, meanwhile, I got pulled and had to go because we were kind of gearing up between the two and the other storm coming up, etc. But you're right. And we did, the practitioners, and I pushed the point of access to care. I pushed the point of look at the ones that are militaristic, not militaristic, wrong word. Those of us that are in the service. And I gave a small little, motivational type talk and said, here we go. Access to care. We're going to go through the state. I can drop in 2 or 3 of you specialties and FN or UNPs that are specialists. We're done. And we almost, I was thinking more along a different way. So I just had troops that I had NPs that were soldiers that we could drop in varying needed access to care areas that we would, when I say drop, yes, we had those resources. I need oxygen. I need medical availability for all these people that are in mobile homes that just got wiped out. I mean, that goes down to the other storm a little bit even more. And then it was like, well, why didn't the state do anything? Well, we have this, we've got official shelters that are used. Yeah, but the people can't get to those places. Anyway, I had to stay off the civilian side and just was on the military, but I kept poking the civilian side. And it was frustrating. So
moving forward for the next storms that will come, right now it looks like the disturbance down in the Caribbean will miss all of the state of Florida and probably stay out in the Atlantic, so that's good. But we've still got a month left of hurricane season this year, and next year's coming. So it's always good to start getting ready for those probabilities and possibilities. As APRNs or nurse practitioners, what do y'all think we could do for our patients? Because on a state level, national level, individuals are kind of limited what we can do right now. But we can start to help our patients and their families get ready for this, because it's inevitability that we're all going to be affected at some point with a hurricane. So what do you see that we can do for our patients for come next year?
I would say the biggest thing to do is focus on one sphere of influence. So the community you serve. So that would mean, as a nurse practitioner, familiarizing yourself with what resources, if any, exist in your community, your county, the cities in which you work, and combine that into a list. And all of your patients, whether you think they need it or not, should receive that list of resources. Now, it would be good to periodically ensure you're updating that in case some of those resources are no longer available. But what we also do, I work for a company that services the highest utilizing patients on a insurance plan. And what we do is we actually keep a list of who utilizes what resources. So that is which of our patients require oxygen or anything for which, if power is interrupted, they could be impacted heavily, or who is likely to decompensate if they have the lights off for too long or they don't have access, what communications are available. So I think the best thing we can do is, although, yes, we are just one person, we still have that power to know who we serve and how we serve and to do the best good. So that would be looking around at what resources exist, compiling that into a list, and ensuring that your family, your friends, the patients you serve have a readily available list that they can stick on the refrigerator, pin to a wall, someplace, since you live in Florida, or I guess at this point, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, have those resources available. Because we have tens of thousands of nurse practitioners across the state of Florida who are increasing access to care every day, providing millions of visits every single year. And each of those visits is an opportunity to potentially save a life or at least impact a life positively. So I think, although sometimes in the grand scheme of things, it can seem as though we're just one person, what possibly could we do? But if you look at it as ripples in a lake, there are enough of us spread across the state doing good work on the daily basis that those ripples are going to overlap each other. So if we're all working through a coordinated effort, utilizing our state organizations to try to spread that there, if one community already has a list, trying to coordinate that aspect through these statewide organizations like the Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners, for example, that would work. We could be, as an organization, one group that could help combine these lists of resources so there aren't 30, 40,000 people doing 40,000 different lists, but rather here are the resources in your area by your county. And I think there's a lot of good that can be done there. So we can take what we've learned through this process and try to benefit all Floridians, improve that access to care, improve those opportunities in the absence of power, the absence of transportation or communication. And I think that would go a long way towards benefiting Floridians.
Right, right.
And I'd like to add on to that. Yeah, we're not going to, when I say we, I apologize when I say it that way, we're not the rescue agency. We're not the police. We're not, and I think I agree with Vernon 100%. It's a beautiful idea if we want to if we want to apply those resources, have those resources available. I think Paul and I mentioned earlier, and we were talking earlier about it too. And I agree. I think it's better than, jumping in. Paul, you and I were talking about pooling also resources like Vernon was.
Right, right. I also think that there's something, and Vernon, you kind of touched on this, but more specifically to the point, instead of just the resources that may be available. I know I have done only probably a dozen, maybe 20 forms for patients who needed to have their power turned back on quickly. And FPL, which covers roughly 65-70% of the state, and I'm sure the other power companies do also, have forms that patients can fill out that their providers would sign, attesting to the fact that they need to have power turned on as quickly as possible, or that they need emergency power, whether it be for a CPAP or for an oxygen concentrator or, an iron lung, although those don't really much exist anymore, but still anything that needs electricity. FPL has a form that we can fill out for our patients. I don't know that our patients know that those forms exist. So maybe adding that to the form, but then discussing with patients, will you need power turn on? Do you have that set up? Do you have an evacuation plan in place? Have you called the local EOC to let them know that you're a special needs person? I know Flagler County does at least limited assistance for some special needs patients for evacuations. But the more that the state agencies know that the need exists, I think the more that they're going to be able to do, because I don't know that they know the amount of need that's actually there. You know what I mean?
That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
And I would add to it, I take my patient compliment, and we're always just discussing it in a sense, make sure I kind of clock it where I have the refills done before, because they'll forget. So they have enough usually for the 3-month period, which runs through the actual hurricane season. And then when we see a storm coming up a week or so, we give them the warning, and then a day or two before, physical calls, make sure you know where your local shelter is for your medical necessities, etc. But that's pretty much on each provider, I guess, plan how they want to manage their groups. Is that kind of general? That's one way of additionally adding. So again, I agree.
Right, and I think Vernon, you hit on a really good potential avenue for the association, Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners, to do something in this area. Maybe we can come up with a resource form that can be used by our members, and even put it out to the general public so that any nurse practitioner can get it, or any physician can get it, to be able to fill out with their patients or give to their patients, so that they have at least a base list of things in their area. Not that we would have the resources, but necessarily have the form that they can use to fill out for the resources.
That is true. It is something that can be done where you can create a template and have it readily available and get that out so you can have these care conversations. We focus a lot on social determinants of health, and this conversation can become part of that. You sit down and go, okay, here's what you are, based on where you live and your resources. Here's your closest shelter. Here are some, and you can just fill in the blank because it's going to differ depending on where you live. But in the event of emergency, this is who should be contacted. In the event of emergencies, these are the needs that I would have. These are some of the preparations that I should have available. Where to get those kind of preparations? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity to, if you cannot avoid being impacted, you can certainly lessen the severity. So knowing your patients, and that comes simply through the conversation. You have to ask the question beyond, are you going to be safe in the storm? You have to go a little bit deeper. And sometimes having forms that require you to ask more specific questions, more probing questions, help you better understand the needs of your patient. So even outside of the hurricane season, there is good to be done there. It would help improve the care relationship, in my opinion. I believe the psychosocial aspect of the care relationship is vitally important. But the more you have that conversation as a provider, the more you personally familiarize yourself with resources. So you become a subject matter expert of sorts about how to prepare that. And I think another thing would be for us as an organization in general, since we unfortunately became aware of this box clicking but going nowhere situation, following up to figure out where does it go, who we contact, if there has been a breakdown, or maybe it's an outdated kind of thing, or maybe that switches over and goes to a disaster response team. Is there a way to optimize that communication? Because there are tens of thousands of nurse practitioners in communities from one tip of the state to the other who I would imagine are willing to help in the ways that they can. If there's a clearly coordinated effort, a clearly coordinated call that goes out, or at least knowing where to go to get that. A simple website or a text thread or email thread that comes out that says, hey, we have you on this list of people who are prepared to respond. Are you able to respond at this time? Or are you able to help in your community? I think will go a long way. So there's some follow-up that needs to be done. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think ultimately we can be much better prepared for the next hurricane and the next years if we do our job now.
And to continue with Vernon saying, excellent, very well said, Vernon, very good. We, FLA&P, we're known up there at the EOC and at the senior management at this point. I gave them the information. I have their information about through FLA&P to contact our senior people at this point. And so we have at least that small component. We have that little link once we do decide how we want to prepare, which is what we're discussing here. I think is very positive going forward.
All right. So I think that's going to kind of wrap up our time. Just to kind of summarize what we've kind of come up with, because it's been a very interesting discussion and very good. And I thank you both for coming on and spending the time. I think we've done a lot of troubleshooting on it, although we could go on for days and troubleshoot this problem alone. And I'm sure the state probably agrees with us also. But what I'm hearing is what we, the association, are considering doing, and this is something that myself as the education director for the association, I will promise the association that we will have some type of form available to use for this purpose sometime in the next 2 to 3 months. So we will have something out for our members and other nurse practitioners who are not members to use, to get in touch with their patients and start educating them about natural disaster, not just hurricanes, but fires and floods and all types of things that come up, to start educating our patients better. And maybe the association will start taking on looking at troubleshooting the communication at the state level with providers. So that's something that we as an association may start looking at. Is there anything that either the two of you can see that I forgot?
I don't think you forgot. I just want to make sure I thank you for, putting this particular and all these podcasts together and allowing us these avenues. I mean, Vernon and I are, and the rest of the board of our board are currently working heavily, and we hope that everyone gets to hear this stuff. But I really want to thank you directly for what you've done in getting this and other things going with the educational committee.
Likewise, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for education to the public and to our colleagues. I think the more we can get the message out there about the resourcefulness, the availability, and the qualifications of advanced practice registered nurses, APRNs, of which nurse practitioners are one of those roles, I think we can really start to make a difference. Oftentimes, it may just be that the general public doesn't quite understand who we are, what we can do, what our educational background is, or rather that we're not utilized in the capacity that's necessary to do the most good. And I think if our goal is to improve the human condition, there are a lot of ways we can do that as advanced practice registered nurses or APRNs. And I look forward to helping my fellow citizens across the state in any way I can.
Wonderful. And Vernon, you brought up an interesting point. That's going to be another soon forthcoming podcast. APRNs, what we are, basically what we do, what our capabilities are, and the different classifications of APRN, of which nurse practitioners are one that you did mention.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, so look forward to that. That'll be forthcoming sometime right after this podcast. And again, thank you both gentlemen for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you again, Paul. And Vernon.
Thank you very much.
And that again was a discussion between myself, Lon Rattner, and Vernon Langford, both of the board of the Association of Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners, concerning some areas that we see for possible improvement for natural disaster response within the state of Florida. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you have any thoughts or input on this topic, please feel free to contact us. Contact the association. The website is flanp.org. Their contact information there. You can also reach out to any of your board members that are also listed on the site with emails there also. So please feel free to reach out. We'd like to hear back from you what your thoughts are, any ideas or input that you may have for changes or what you saw may have been problems. Again, we're here to help you and support you in any way we can. So reach out to us if you feel you'd like to. Again, this is Paul Bond, APRN for the Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners, the Florida Nurse Practitioner Podcast, which is a production of the Florida Association of Nurse Practitioners. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.